Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammang saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Panatipata, where mani sikapadang samadhiyami. I undertake the training from harming living beings. So take a moment and just reflect on this first precept, this first training, what it might look like in our lives. And now the second of the 5 precepts. Adinadana, where mani sikapadang samadhiyami. I undertake the training to refrain from taking that which is not given. And now the third. Kamesu miccachara, where mani sikapadang samadhiyami. I undertake the training to refrain from causing harm through sexual misconduct. And now the fourth. Musawada, where mani sikapadang samadhiyami. I undertake the training to refrain from false and harmful speech. And now the fifth. Sura Meriya Maja Pamadatana, where mani sikapadang samadhiyami. I undertake the training to refrain from the misuse of intoxicants. And then we end with this closing phrase. Idam me silang magafalanyana sapachayo hotu. May my conduct lead to attainment of the deepest fruits of liberation. And settle in to a comfortable posture for the meditation time. And I thought it might be helpful to begin our sitting time with this reflection. It's a simile. I think it does go back to the time of the Buddha, but it for sure has been a teaching story for a long time. And the image is of a horse that pulls a chariot, and how some of those horses, not being that well trained, the charioteer really needs to whip them to get them to do what they need to do, to go fast, to slow down, to go this way or that way. And other horses kind of get the way it all works, and the driver doesn't need to really use the whip very much. Maybe just a subtle sound from the driver and the horse gets, oh, I need to do this or I need to do that. And some horses are in between. A lighter whip or even the crack of the whip close to the body of the horse but not actually hitting the horse gets the horse's attention. And I know it's a bit of a provocative image, the way animals are treated. But the way this story, the simile is used is what kind of horse are we? In terms of the lessons of cause and effect that life delivers to us, do we need to be really beaten down before we make appropriate changes in our lives? Or are we picking up even the most subtle cues from cause and effect and realizing, oh, this isn't helping anybody, it should be abandoned, I have abandoned this tendency. I feel the impulse, but the heart knows better because it understands cause and effect. It doesn't believe that promise, if you do this, you'll be really happy in some meaningful way. Because it's observed cause and effect, it learned, oh yeah, that doesn't help. Ignoring this voice of conscience, I'm not going to ignore it anymore. Maybe it knows what it's talking about when it says, oh, you don't need to do this. Oh, it won't be helpful if you do that. So given that we are one kind of a horse or another, and not always the same kind of horse, probably everybody has been that horse that really needed to hurt before we started to pay attention, really needed to fall into a difficult space before we became reflective. And in that way, in a funny way, we can be grateful for the suffering because it can point out that we need to make different choices. It can wake us up sometimes, depending on the kind of horse we are. So let's begin now with some forgiveness practice, and mostly just forgiving ourselves. You know, each of us in our own way are relatively dense in terms of learning the lessons from nature, from the conditional cause and effect nature of our lives. Needing sometimes to make the same mistake many times. So we begin by remembering the very simple truth that it isn't easy being a human being, and it isn't easy having a conditioned or habit-bound mind, all these impulses and tendencies to think particular ways and perceive particular ways and act in particular ways. I care about this life, And I care enough to forgive myself for all the mistakes, all the little and all the bigger ways that I've caused myself and others harm. As best I can, I forgive myself for the harm that I've caused. And may all these choices that have set in motion my own suffering and the suffering of others, may they become good lessons, heartfelt, literally heartfelt lessons. So we transform the unpleasantness of guilt and regret into this moral sensitivity, this vibrant conscience that knows when we're in the vicinity of setting in motion more suffering for ourselves and others. So this is the pledge, really. We forgive ourselves, but we recommit. We make the resolve to learn from any of the smaller or bigger mistakes that we've made in our lives, times when our thoughts, our words, and actions have caused us pain. And you might even want to bring one or more of these situations. Let your heart distill the learning and just clarifying the resolve to pay attention when a similar situation arises, to not do the same thing. And to be appreciative that the heart has the sensitivity that it didn't have before. So take some time reflecting in this way. We'll do maybe 5 minutes of silence so you can bring a few of these scenarios to mind. As best I can, I forgive myself for any mistakes, knowing that it isn't easy being a human being. And I really vow, make a strong resolve to learn, to turn any regret, any guilt, any yucky feeling into this really helpful voice or voice of conscience or moral sensitivity. I want to feel what life has taught me as a kind of moral sensitivity, knowing the difference between what's helpful, what's skillful, and what's not skillful as I live this life. And you can continue with this forgiveness reflection as long as you like, bringing different scenarios from the past to mind, feeling the regret that's there, and resolving to turn that regret into the service of this moral sensitivity. So that in a sense we're going to feel our way through our lives with the sensitivity that comes from all the past moments. Having learned our lessons, having made mistakes, having forgiven ourselves, but forgiving doesn't mean we forget what we've learned. And it's only this way that we learn to be unafraid in life, because we trust the morally sensitive heart knows how to feel its way. It may not always be crystal clear about how to handle a situation, but we know if we hang in, if we pause, if we keep feeling in, we're likely to find our way, avoiding the harm that can be avoided. So for the rest of the sit, continue with the forgiveness reflection, or just appreciating the sensitivity, clarity, and especially tonight, discussing the fifth precept around intoxicants. Just seeing if you can directly appreciate the sensitivity and clarity that's available. The mind that really feels, sees, can know clearly the way it is. Why would we want to diminish this clarity or sensitivity? Well, first we need to really appreciate it in order to protect it. So we'll continue in silence now for about 10 minutes. It's just interesting to observe the mind getting lost in thought. And then when you notice that distraction, that's the time to, in a gentle way, just to clarify the values we have. Can we find that actual valuing of present moment awareness, that clarity, that stability of awareness? So it's not that we're shaming ourselves for being distracted. Instead, we're just remembering that we just prefer that stability of present moment awareness, no matter how juicy the distractions might be, and they certainly can be, right? But just see if we can actually prefer the stability, simplicity, clarity of present moment awareness. Because it allows for this moral sensitivity. We can't really be morally sensitive if we're not present. Feeling our way through life, moment by moment, even these simple moments during sitting time. We're just going to sit for another few minutes. This sensitivity really arises from a wisdom that knows that everything matters. Even something as seemingly simple as what the mind is doing right now, it matters. That's what moral sensitivity reveals. There is nothing that doesn't matter. Everything matters. How the mind is right now, how it's relating, what it's doing, it all matters. And we won't know how to find our way unless we're willing to be sensitive. And if we're sensitive, we sense the skillfulness or the unskillfulness of how the mind's relating, what the mind is doing. And this is what I mean by saying we feel our way through. So in that way, our sitting time, if we sit in the morning, for example, we're just creating a more simple environment to practice feeling our way through one moment at a time. And better discerning what's helpful, what's skillful, what's unhelpful. And then that can be a real inspiration for how we live our lives in that sensitive, receptive, gentle way, so we can continue to be feeling our way through, even during the busier times. While we're talking, while we're listening. So when you feel ready, if your eyes aren't already open, let them open and begin to make adjustments. Taking care of our bodies. And nice to be with everyone tonight, week 8 of our Buddhist Studies class. I'm sure you notice I'm wearing a mask tonight. And there was somebody on our workshop on Saturday that just tested positive this afternoon. So for those of you who came to the Living the Practice workshop on Saturday, it was more than 2 days ago, a little bit more than 2 days ago, but still some exposure there. And so I'm modeling good CDC behavior, wearing my mask. And I asked Robin if Robin would say a little bit about dana, this Pali word for generosity. Do you want to do that now, Robin? This is the PA, and this is for the...
Can you hear me okay? Hey everybody, I'm Robin, the office manager here, and yeah, I just wanted to say a few words about dana, the Pali word for generosity, and it's so appropriate to talk about in the context of Sila, of this theme of ethics, and yeah, it's just such a deep practice in of itself, this cultivation of a generous heart, and really goes against such, so much of our conditioning. And as many of you know, Common Ground is run completely 100% on dana, on generosity. And when I left the cities about a couple years ago and studied at different centers around the country, just was really struck by what a beautiful place Common Ground is, and how amazing it is, just the causes and conditions that have enabled Common Ground to exist solely on dana. It's really, really rare in the West. And all of Mark's livelihood and Shelley's livelihood and what goes to pay me in the office comes from dana, from generosity. The building, all the volunteers that make Common Ground, and scrubbing the toilets and showing the people helping out with the building and fixing the dishwasher, and it's all from dana. So if you feel called to offer dana in any way, there's really no right way to do it at all. The only real ask is just to notice the impact on the heart, and what does it feel like, when we give, and what does it feel like to not give? And sometimes it's really appropriate to not, and sometimes the edge is to give, by volunteering in some way, and sometimes it's financially. So if you would like to and have any questions, you can ask me. There's an iPad in the lobby. You can give online. There's also a dana table right outside the Dharma hall. Thanks.
Thank you, Robin. Doing that. And for those of you who've been around for a few years, we're always looking for community members to do. We kind of got out of the habit during the COVID times, but some of you remember, at least once a month, somebody would give a dana talk at some of the different programs at the center. And it's nice to have some of you who've been around for a few years who have learned how to have the relationship that Robin was talking about, because it's unique to each of us, our conditions, our resources. And it's only by listening and seeing what really feels right, leaves a good reverberation in our morally sensitive heart that we've been talking about these 8 weeks. So just let me know, like you could do it in the fall or on Sunday morning or Sunday evening down the road or Wednesday night during Shelley's weekly practice group. Because it's nice to hear different voices talk about how it lives and works in their lives, this feeling and experience of dana, generosity. And of course, it's not just in terms of your relationship to the Buddhist Meditation Center. It's kind of the foundation of our whole spiritual path, to feel that circle of giving and receiving in every single relationship. To be grateful for the functionality of my body, the resilience of my body, and to be inspired to give back to my body, to clip my nails and brush my teeth and do what I can, have a nice night's sleep and feed my body good, healthy food. And, that's a circle too. And in every way, every single relationship. And in a way, common ground, your relationship to common ground could just be a training ground for what we want to do in all of our relationships. Like really listen, what is the appropriate way to be in relationship with the community, the center, the teachers, the office staff, the other volunteers and leaders, so that it's a cause for happiness instead of a cause for shame or guilt or whatever, So it's a little sad always coming to the last week. Oh, thank you. Sorry about that, Mr. and Mrs. and they, them Zoom folks. So I was saying it's always a little sad coming to the last week, and especially the topic of Sila, moral sensitivity. Not only could we, but we really should keep the conversation going forever. And I don't know, I might have mentioned last week, one of the fun things to mention when talking about wise speech are the topics that the Buddha recommends that are appropriate for conversation, and it's not politics and it's not the best new restaurants. It's things like Sila, oh, I noticed this impulse early in the day and I felt it and I didn't act on it. And I feel so empowered that I wanted to take something that wasn't mine and I saw it, and I don't hate myself for having that impulse, but I didn't have to act on it. And I feel empowered, like almost like a superpower. I don't have to worry about those unwholesome tendencies in my mind, in my heart, because I know how to refrain from acting on them. You know how it is. It's like, oh, I can't go there because I might do something that I'll regret. Well, sometimes we can't avoid those places where that impulse is going to come up. And it's really nice to observe it come up, observe that wisdom sees it and is willing to feel what that impulse feels like, and not be confused by it. Oh yeah, it's an impulse. I sense that it will set emotion suffering for myself and others, not skillful. I know how to just be with it without feeding it, without getting confused by it. It's like, imagine if we, reached out to every person we found attractive. It wouldn't work out well. We know that, oh yeah, that for me, given how my mind, heart's conditioned, I find this person attractive. And I know that feeling of attraction. And I don't have to be afraid. I mean, initially, we tend to either just act on like attraction. It doesn't have to be toward another person, or it could be toward an object or even an image of myself becoming somebody. I can be attracted to that too, or attracted to getting away from something, right? But we feel that can be in moments really powerful, like tonight talking about the fifth precept, being attracted to getting high. And I think I mentioned earlier, I haven't really consumed alcohol or drugs now for quite a while, many decades. But when I was young, I definitely experimented and partied and did those things that young adults tend to do. And I like the feeling of being high. Still do. Now I just have green tea and sometimes black tea, but mostly just green tea and sugar and media. Those are things that I can, and food. I think that's it. And well, I mean, there's other things too, like even movement, dancing you can get a little high with movement. And of course, we don't need to be afraid of being high. Intoxicants is one of the precepts. It's different than the other precepts in that the Buddha didn't say that alcohol, for example, is itself immoral. The problem is it dulls the sensitivity of the mind, right? So when the mind is less clear, less sensitive, it's easier to be swept away by habit. And some of our habits are really unskillful. So one of the ways that fifth precept reads is to refrain from intoxicating the mind in ways that lead to carelessness. And that people like that. Oh, so wine, beer, whatever, smoking a joint, that it isn't inherently immoral. That's good. But one of the things we want to remember with these trainings is, like, some people might in their particular situation be able to consume a couple glasses of wine or whatever, every week or so, several times a week perhaps even, and they might not notice any ill effects in their life. They don't lose that much clarity. They don't make mistakes in what they say or what they think or what they do. But one of the things that Thich Nhat Hanh says, and this, I thought, I should give a little trigger warning for this, because these things that the mind is attached to, we kind of sometimes, we don't want to hear a differing view. So I thought, oh, I'm sort of not doing justice to this fifth precept without giving a different view, a more rigid, you could say, or more like, no, this is the way kind of view. This comes from Thich Nhat Hanh, and this is from a book he wrote a long time ago. He passed away, you might remember, this last winter. And the book, For a Future to Be Possible, is his book on the precepts. And I think it was written maybe 25 years ago, maybe even more. And here he's talking about the fifth precept, refraining from intoxication. He writes, "What is the use of practicing this mindfulness training if drinking alcohol does not harm you or other people?" So this is somebody asking Thich Nhat Hanh. And he responds, although you have not harmed yourself during the last 30 years by drinking just 1 or 2 glasses of wine every week, the fact is that it may have an effect on your children, your grandchildren, and your society. We only need to look deeply in order to see it. You are practicing not for yourself alone, but for everyone. Your children might have a propensity for alcoholism, and seeing you drinking wine every week, one of them may become alcoholic in the future. If you abandon your 2 glasses of wine, it is to show your children, your friends, and your society that your life is not only for you, not only for yourself. Your life is for your ancestors, future generations, and also your society. To stop drinking 2 glasses of wine every week is a very deep practice, even if it has not brought you any harm. That is the insight of a bodhisattva who knows that everything she does is done for all her ancestors and all future generations. And this is kind of hard for us to hear. around our choices. And it's just really good for me, I mentioned in the early weeks of the course that one of our habits sometimes with these precepts, these trainings in morality, is to want to simplify them about like, I need to meet this bar. And if I meet that bar, then I'm golden, and I don't have to think about this anymore because I'm on the other side of this threshold. I don't kill, or whatever, or I don't kill mammals, other creatures, but remember, they're trainings that have no end. It's not like we expect to be done with the training in moral sensitivity. We're trying to feel enlivened, liberated by the training. It's a liberating training, not like it's a pain in the butt. Let me get to where I need to get with it, and then I can put it down because I'm past that threshold. I'm one of the good ones and no longer one of the bad ones, right? So that's obviously a really simplistic way of thinking about these trainings. And so I'd encourage you to think about that in terms of intoxicants in all the different ways different sense experience can be an intoxicant for us. And it's not going to be the same. Like some people get intoxicated by social interactions, and the heart just wants to feed, seems to be dependent and deep need of some kind of social time with friends, and feels lost and really uncomfortable when it's not happening. So we have to just look ourselves. What is it that distorts our mind, confuses the mind, makes the mind not so capable of being stably present with things just as they are? Hope is a drug. There's marijuana, there's this and there's that, and there's hoping, the way our mind can whip up a future scenario like a drug. And then there's like useful, normal, helpful planning that's not so like a drug. So it's not so simple to say, well, we're just talking about alcohol and drugs. We're talking about anything the mind does, the body and the mind does, that really trips up, interrupts this clarity. And I think I brought this up when we were talking about truthfulness earlier. And, this commitment to truth is really the whole path. The whole path of being a skillful, wise, kind, and ultimately free human being depends on the heart's willingness to align with the truth of the moment, with humility, knowing that we don't see clearly, and don't see clearly at least completely. So we're interested in that. And so to the degree that we really sense this unavoidable and really ultimately beautiful devotion to the truth of things, then we really don't want to interrupt it with anything that distorts the mind, colors the mind, dulls the mind. We really like, it's sort of our real treasure, not some heirloom we got from grandma or some muscles we got because we were really devoted to getting to the gym 4 times a week, or hard-earned savings that we've worked for decades to save up. Those things can be really nice, being in really good shape or having been really responsible with our finances, or really careful with our health and how we eat, or really dedicated to being a good friend and developing really wholesome friendships over the years. And we got these solid friendships now. But the real treasure, better than those real treasures, is this aligning with the truth. And one aspect, one facet of that truth is that moral sensitivity. precisely because the heart has learned to value seeing clearly, feeling deeply, where else would this moral sensitivity come from? It's all that relatively clean data that we've been collecting because we've been relatively awake, clear. Then that's why we have that kind of conscience, that moral sensitivity, because the heart recognizes from previous experiences, and not only our own, just from observing everything else around us, everybody. The heart just has sensitivity to how it all works, how stinginess doesn't really work, because it's seen the movement, the activity of stinginess within our own heart and mind and out there in the world from so many different angles, right? In research theory, that's called triangulation. Like when we see something from hundreds of different directions, different angles, the mind can really distill the essence. Stinginess doesn't work. Real generosity, not contrived generosity coming out of fear, but a natural giving always is connected with happiness, just like real stinginess is always connected with unhappiness. Now, you're not supposed to believe me. When you hear something like that from somebody, you use your moral sensitivity. Like, how does that align with the data that this sensitive heart has been collecting, being relatively awake, relatively sensitive? Do I have data that contradicts that? So when we get a little teaching from the Buddha or from some wise lineage that we suspect is wise at least, then because this moral sensitivity is ultimately what we're going to trust. But it's nice when it's confirmed by someone who appears to know what they're talking about, and then say, oh, instead of thinking, oh, I'm so glad you know what you're doing, what comes out of that is like, oh, this heart is pretty good. It can be my best friend. It can help me navigate my way through life. Because I see, this is a great thing about like learning the Buddhist teachings, not so much for those teachings to tell us what to do. It's almost better in hindsight where we're doing the practices, but we don't necessarily know that much of the teachings. But then when we study the teachings, we go, it is so encouraging to read that what the Buddha talks about is what's been happening in my own life, right? So then it's almost like I see that the Buddha's path lines up with my own, and that makes me trust my own spiritual instincts so much more. So when we get a moral code like the precepts, refraining from killing, from harming, refraining from taking what hasn't been given, refraining from sexual misconduct, refraining from speech that's harsh or idle, not helpful, or slanderous, meant to harm, or speech that isn't true. And in refraining from intoxicating the mind, that increases the carelessness of our actions, our thoughts and words. Then it's like that we look and we see, oh yeah, and you see, this isn't specific to Buddhism, these sort of codes of like, don't hit, take turns, human beings have been realizing, this is this distillation of any human being that's paid attention to life. They'll tell you this helps. Being mean, stealing, taking what isn't yours doesn't help. And then the question is, are we going to live in accordance with what, what the data says, what the data tells us? This is meant to shock us a little bit. This is from the Dalai Lama. I changed the pronouns here, just so you know. When asked what surprised him most about humanity, the Dalai Lama answered, people, because they sacrifice their health in order to make money, then they sacrifice money to recuperate their health. Then they are anxious about the future, so anxious about the future that they don't enjoy the present. The result being that they don't live in the present or the future. They live as if they're never going to die, and then they die having never really lived. Right? And it's because we haven't mindfully, carefully cultivated this sensitivity that will allow us to feel our way. And I've been saying that it isn't about getting to some point where then we're kind of clear of our moral obligations. We're good. Everyone knows we're good. But it's just a movement towards more and more sensitivity. And really everything just flows from that. This, what we learn in meditation practice is just the continuation of this sensitivity. We're kind of learning the same lessons in three places. That's a good way. That's how the Buddha organized it in terms of the Eightfold Path. But the Eightfold Path is a more simplistic way, is in this it's like three healing medicines, three lessons that we learn. And we learn because of our sensitivity. So when we're sensitive, we learn what really works in terms of the realm of our relationships with others and the world. And this is Sila, the kind of gross aspect. In terms of frequency, it's the grosser of the three frequencies. These kind of worldly relationships we have to food, to money, to sex, to each other, to our possessions, to our body, and how we relate to those worldly things. It matters, and we can use our sensitivity to learn how it matters, so we can better harmonize with all those things, with our sexuality, with our relationship to money, to possessions, to friends, to enemies, to how can we harmonize when we're a human being living in a world like this? So there's a particular ecology of all these relationships on this worldly level. And then we have the middle frequency is how we relate to our own mind, how the mind is relating to the mind. And on this level, we're talking about emotions and content of our thoughts and the perceptions we're having, the feeling, tone of all those experiences. And it's a garden too, just like our worldly life of the relationships with our possessions and friends and enemies. That's like a garden that we're trying to harmonize, learn what helps and doesn't help, what leads to suffering, what leads to harmony. Same thing in our mind. And this, this is in Sila. This middle part is samadhi. Some of you know, recognize, right? This is the healing of the mind as opposed to the healing of our relationships with the world. Now we're trying to create harmony within our own mind. And when we do, we call it samadhi. When we have harmony in our relationships, we call it the bliss of blamelessness, or freedom from remorse, or the happiness of harmony. And there's equivalent with just this middle frequency of like, how's the mind doing? And then the most subtle place that we're bringing that sensitivity is in terms of our view, or this deepest understanding or view, which for most of us untrained people, that deepest, mostly unseen, but deeply established view is, it's all about me. I, me, and mine, that self-view that permeates and gets projected in different ways continuously, because it's a deep, subtle habit. And this, with our view, this most subtle level, we're trying to also harmonize. Just like we're trying to harmonize with Sila, like how to relate to common ground, like what Robin was talking about earlier. We are in relationship with this Buddhist meditation center and the teachers and the staff and all the volunteers. Whether we like it or not, we're in relationship. So the question is, how's that working for us? And there's only one way to find out. We have to feel. Like, how does it feel? Does it feel harmonious? When we think about common ground in the middle of the night, do we go, oh, or do we go, ah, like it's left a good taste, my relationship? Because that's what we feel. Just like, there are a few people in my life, I'm assuming I'm not so different than the rest of you, but when they come to mind, there's some regret there. Like, oh, and sometimes that when I'm conscious of that regret, I reflect, is there anything I can do now to make amends, to kind of change that feeling of regret or, oh, whatever that is. And if I can't, then I try to do what I was talking about earlier this evening. Like, how can I turn it into a resolve, into a sensitivity, so I don't neglect or don't make the same kind of mistake? And this is really what we want. So in a few minutes, we're going to break up into small groups. Remember, this is part of our work in the Buddhist studies classes. And by the way, we will be looking at the hindrances in the fall. 6 weeks, Shelley Graff will join me. And so we'll teach those 6 weeks together, taking turns. And that will begin, I think, on Monday, the 12th of September, and go to the 17th. The registration isn't ready yet, but probably will be in a week. And Robin or I will send an email out when it's ready for people to register. But just remember, in the Buddhist studies, we're showing up for each other every other week in these small groups, whether you're online or here in the room, and you're just reporting in. Now, a couple of things you could do in that small group. I sent out last week these different reflections on wise speech. Oh, here they are. And so that might be something you want to talk about, like your own particular ways of causing harm with your speech, like interrupting. I mean, it's something I've really trained myself, not that I'm there yet, but like just noticing in meetings, wanting like, but I've got something important to say, and it's like, just that impatience. It's just an interesting place of practice for me. Like, what am I really afraid of? Waiting a little bit. Like, I mean, the worst thing that could happen is we're wasting time, because what I have to say is so important that it means you don't have to say what you're saying. I mean, that's kind of how we think, or I think sometimes. So that's just, these little common ways that you use your speech that maybe now are standing out, how you use flattery. That's another thing that was longer ago, but I noticed, like, when I was interacting with people in subtle ways, I would just find something nice to say about them, until I started to notice, like, I really like people to like me. It was like, you can think of it, I'm sure it can be really a generous, beautiful, kind thing to do, but it also can be a manipulative thing to do. And it's really good for us to know the difference. What is the motivation behind me saying this or wanting to say this? What's the effect of saying this? Well, we can find the answer to that by paying attention and feeling into it, right? And really see, like, oh, this flattery, saying something nice, is really a power move. It's controlling. It's manipulative. Oh, and it feels like this. Okay. And that's a nice thing to know. And there's many other examples here, how you might use idle speech, like how power dynamics. I was interested, I did a workshop, Shelley and I did a workshop with a few other Common Ground leaders earlier in the fall, about a year ago, I guess now. And it was all about how power works in organizations. And one of the interesting things is like how humor is different. Like if the person with the most power does humor, it has one kind of effect. But if somebody else at a different status, different level uses humor. So it's just like even like your jokes and the motivation behind them. And is it a way of like, is it really about calling attention to myself? Is it about this generosity of like loosening things up in the group? Because there are a lot of love can get expressed through humor too, right? I've seen that like just can be quite beautiful about how humor can break down boundaries and bring people together, but it can do all kinds of things. And the moral sensitivity really wants to get at what it's like honest, because it's only interested in what is getting set in motion. Because the story could be a big lie, like what we tell ourselves, why I'm saying this, why I'm doing this, why I'm drinking this. But what moral sensitivity is just following the facts, cause and effect, what's getting set in motion, what does this lead to? Is that wholesome? Cause for release? Is it unwholesome? A cause for stress? So that might be one thing you could talk about in the small groups, just different speaking, including a tendency not to say anything for some of you. And like, have you investigated that? And what has that revealed about your motivation, about the skillfulness or unskillfulness of being relatively the quiet one or the sarcastic one? That's another thing I should still study. But I've gotten better. And I see like where those tendencies, just like I'm sure you do, we're just a continuation of our parenting or somewhere. It came from somewhere. We didn't invent this particular speech pattern way of interacting with others. It has its roots, but we're responsible right now to discern its skillfulness or unskillfulness. And by seeing its unskillfulness, if that's what it is, and really being willing to feel the unskillfulness, that is the process of uprooting that tendency, to see it honestly, feel it deeply, not to hate ourselves or judge ourselves, but to track it and to see what it sets in motion. It's the seeing that it's not helpful that does the uprooting, and the seeing that it's helpful that strengthens the tendency. And of course, the other thing you might want to talk about tonight in the small groups is just how you navigate this world of intoxicants and the kind of resolves you've used in your lives, and were they helpful or not helpful, and where do you find you're drawn to intoxicants, and how do you just deal with that? Whatever it is, it might be pornography, it might be just reading dumb novels or watching TV that doesn't really help you in any way, or overeating or using alcohol in ways that you wish you didn't use, or drugs. So however you've been involved with intoxicants, that you feel comfortable enough sharing, and just what you've learned about it, including, I feel trapped, because that's the truth, like, I don't know my way out of this. And that's really useful for all of us to know, because we probably have our own places where the mind keeps going back to that well open, that promise that's never kept, but we can't stop ourselves. I noticed like even I have a new calf and it's so sensitive to heat and cold, but I still need my ice cream. We have some ice cream. We had a big family reunion, so we still have some ice cream in the house left over from it. Not that that's an unusual thing for us to have in the freezer, but it's interesting because it really can hurt. I have to be so careful eating the ice cream. And yet it's like, I really feel like it's there. I should have it. It's just, well, what's that about? Is that an addiction? Is that an intoxicant? The creamy sugariness of that? So let's leave it here. I see that Dave is here to help with the small groups online. I want to just say a hearty goodbye. So as you know, for these groups, we're a little bit late, but it won't be more than 5 after 9, but we'll have a solid 20 minutes. Everyone gets a chance to check in, then open conversation for about 5 or 7 minutes after that. So wishing everyone well. Hope to see some of you in the fall for the fall course. Thank you, Dave, for being here. I'll go ahead and shut the YouTube off.